On the Road with Kelly and Bob is brought to you by Mueller Metal Roofs and Buildings. Made in America, made to last.
Hi, we're Kelly
and Bob Phillips, and we're on the perpetual road trip of America's back roads,
where the journey is always the destination.
Thanks for joining us for this edition of On the Road with Kelly and Bob. Okay, the story we're about to tell you is coming from a little burg called Brooklyn, New York.
When you visit a big metropolitan area, do you ever wonder where all those people come from? Well, one thing that we've learned over the years is that lots of those people in big towns come from small towns.
My name is Amy Grindeland, and I grew up in Hallettsville, Texas, which is a very small town, just about in the middle of Austin, Houston, and San Antonio, Texas. Small town, small city, lots of football, and I played basketball, and I think I knew that there was more out there, and I couldn't wait to get out and see it. And I found my way up to New York City in 1999 by way of Continental Airlines. I was a flight attendant. A few months later, I met my husband, Alex.
And get out and see she did. Amy Grindeland moved to New York City, became an international flight attendant, and traveled the world. Along the way, she met her husband, Alex.
My name's Alex Clark. I was born and raised in London, in England. I bartended my way through university in the UK to make money on the side. And when I graduated university, I ended up getting a job as a currency options broker. That job moved me to America, to New York. I wasn't crazy about the job, but I was crazy about New York. So I quit the job after a while and got really stuck into the city. Shortly thereafter, met Amy, my beautiful wife.
When they first met, Amy and Alex knew right away that even though he came from a huge city in another country, and she came from a small town in Texas, they had a lot in common. For one, they were both curious about the world they live in, and they had open, optimistic attitudes about what that world had to offer.
And they both tended bar. Amy to support her life as a flight attendant, Alex to save him from spending his life behind a desk in corporate America. They were married and had children. Life was good. And then good led to interesting. Very interesting indeed.
So I started bartending with some of the people who were responsible in many ways for the cocktail renaissance in America and now globally. Our friend Sasha, who had a bar called Milk and Honey, a very famous bar on the Lower East Side, was the first modern speakeasy bar. So every speakeasy that you now set foot in Dubai to Sydney to Austin, Texas, they were all kind of based on that one bar that he conceived in Lower East Side, New York in 1999.
The speakeasy, a byproduct of the days of Prohibition, when the sale of alcoholic beverages became illegal in America. Backwoods distilleries, or stills, were prevalent across the country, producing illegal hooch that was sold from the backs of trucks and in secret, out-of-the-way places that were advertised only by word of mouth, and even then, you couldn't get in without the secret code.
The speakeasy was a style of bar that was popularized during Prohibition because it was illicit. Speakeasies were hidden, tucked away behind a nondescript door, generally down some stairs through a corridor or some place that was difficult to get to and easier to hide in. A lot of these cocktails were born out of that time, so they've got very classic names like the Aviation. Things like this, like really great grand names.
It was a strange yet somehow romantic part of American history, and it only lasted a short while, but it left its mark on our culture. So much so that less than 70 years after the speakeasy disappeared from basements and alleyways of America's towns, modern-day versions of these hidden bar rooms began to emerge again. And that's when Alex and Amy went to work to make things right.
Prohibition had happened, which killed all the distilleries in the northeast of America that were initially making the original whiskeys of America, which was rye whiskey. Prohibition shut all those down, and this was quickly followed by corn subsidies, which encouraged people to use corn as the base for their whiskeys. So here we are in the early 2000s in New York City. We're trying to make these original recipes. Rye whiskey is almost impossible to come by. Certainly the original style of rye whiskey that would have been used in a classic Manhattan cocktail, which is 2 ounces of rye whiskey, 1 ounce of sweet vermouth, and a couple of dashes of bitters. So we decided that perhaps this is a wrong that should be righted.
It's simple, really. You can't revive a product from the past without the ingredients of that product.
The original American rye whiskey had been replaced by bourbon or corn whiskey, and the way Alex and Amy saw it, that was a problem.
We started building our distillery here in Brooklyn in 2019, having already got a foothold in the market with our single barrel rye whiskey and our double barrel rye whiskey, and then moved into our distillery in 2020, awkward timing with the pandemic. But nonetheless, we persevered and we started releasing our bourbons and most recently our gin and our vodka.
Tell me what this room is here. What are we doing in here?
So we're standing in the distillery and bottling room. Here we've got our still Eliza, named after Alexander Hamilton's wife.
Alexander Hamilton's wife. And that brings up a very important part of this story. In fact, it's the story behind the story, the backstory, if you will.
The name of this place, this brand, is Fort Hamilton. And that's not just something Alex and Amy pulled out of the air. It's significant here in Brooklyn, New York.
So we knew we wanted a name that was evocative of history and that time in America. We are based in South Brooklyn, which is where the Battle of Brooklyn kicked off, or also known as the Battle of Long Island. The truth is that I would be riding the subway back from my bartending gig in the city. Then I'd always get off the subway at our subway stop, which is Fort Hamilton Parkway. I was like, oh, Fort Hamilton, that's kind of cool. And then, looked into it, and Fort Hamilton is this army base at the foot of the Verrazano Bridge. It's the last functioning army base in New York City. As the British marched north, they up what is now 4th Avenue in Brooklyn, where we're right next to here, they got to the Red Lion Inn, which was 1 block from where we're sitting now in the distillery, which was surrounded by a watermelon patch, and they started stealing the watermelons, were discovered by the American pickets who started unloading their muskets on them, and that's how the Battle of Brooklyn started. So we took that story and developed it into the base for our gin, which is distilled with watermelons and cucumbers as sort of an homage to that original skirmish in the watermelon patch. So we kind of took inspiration from the Revolutionary War, from the Battle of Brooklyn, to help build the brand out, keep everything kind of in that sphere, as it were. So Fort Hamilton has this great history to it.
We visited Fort Hamilton Distillery on Bottling Day, when friends and family and a few employees gather to put the product into containers to be shipped to the distributor and eventually to bars and stores all over.
And then over here we have our bottling line, and this is our team working on the line today. This is our 4-head filler, which means you can fill 4 bottles at a time.
Having come up with the idea, spent all of the time and labor and tears and everything else on building this, what does it mean to you?
Well, it means something to be a part of history. It means something to create something, to take a part of American history that was lost. I didn't know that they stopped making rye whiskey. I didn't know that they stopped making rye because of Prohibition. Without our friends, without Sasha and our friend group in the Lower East Side of Manhattan, and Alex's love to recreate, I'm glad that we came on the journey and we can tell stories and Rye whiskey is now a countable category again, and we had a part in that. To have a part in that process has been great.
We got to spend a lot of time with Amy and Alex, even after our interview. It was fascinating to listen to Alex talk more about the speakeasy scene in New York. So why don't you take a listen?
If you didn't know someone, you didn't know where the door was, you weren't going to get in. It became this hunt almost. And then these places that were offering this style of drink and these styles of cocktails that were now in the late 90s were sought after and were whispered about in hushed tones in a city of millions of people. And then all of a sudden, there's a really crazy place that you hear about, that you really want to go to, that you hear just has the best cocktails in town.
Made with the original ingredients.
Right, made authentically. So that was the real key to this scene. There was this movement away from bright pink, bright blue, bright green drinks, away from like sour mix in a bottle, which is just like citric acid and sugar, which is shelf stable for 1 million years, back to the way that things were made pre-industrially. So, freshly made juices, fresh syrups, classic ingredient, instead of like sparklers and fireworks flying out the top of a drink. It was like, no, we just want to have something simple but balanced and made with really great ingredients.
So you're telling me I'm not going to find an umbrella in my drink?
No, I'm not telling you that at all. We're not that stuck up. We still like to have some fun. The Rye Thai cocktail that's on the menu here has an umbrella in it. And I designed that cocktail specifically to be fun. So yeah.
I put the umbrella in
Amy
there
did, yeah.
against his wishes, and he decided it was fun.
Yeah, that is actually true.
But it seems like everything you do here is rooted in history.
It's again back to the storytelling, and it's like, why is this here? Why are we drinking this? Bringing it back, educating people. When I think of watermelons, I never thought about the Battle of Brooklyn. I'm a Texas girl, and I think of watermelons in summertime.
Not far from Louis.
Yeah, no, exactly. But yeah, apparently the pickets were attacking the British that were stealing watermelons. And I always like to say, they were on those ships for a long time, so I'm sure that fresh fruit looks really good.
Yeah, I think that the authenticity is exactly what we strive for here, There is truth to everything that we do here, and we try and make it as transparent and honest as possible. And that goes back to the way that the cocktails were being designed and made at Milk and Honey in those types of bars and scenarios. And the fact that rye whiskey died a death, which was unnecessary and forced by government legislation, felt really inauthentic to us. So, in an effort to make the best, most authentic Manhattan cocktail on planet Earth, we had to reinvent the product, as it were, that was the base of it. And so that's what we did, which is kind of ridiculous. But at the end of the day, we wanted a decent Manhattan, and this is the only way to do it.
What's been the response so far?
Overwhelmingly positive, but we've also tried not to overextend ourselves. We've started narrow and deep, as it were, in terms of our sales and growth strategy. Very much focused on New York to date. We do some work in New Jersey, a little in Connecticut, which are obviously connected geographically to New York. But also people can buy on the website now, right? So we're trying to take advantage of those direct-to-consumer opportunities as well. So if somebody wants to order a bottle of Fort Hamilton in Texas, for example, they can just go to our website and get it done.
It was funny, 2 summers ago, we had a family reunion, and we were on our way, and we stopped in Kentucky. So you asked about the response. So we've had a great response here in our community, but Alex said, well, either we're gonna get laughed out of town, or they're gonna love us. And so we went, and they loved us. We were picked up in, what was the private barrel that was bought in the
Hell or High Water.
Hell or High Water.
Which is like a speakeasy cocktail bar in Louisville. They tasted one of the rye barrels that I brought with me. But they tasted it and said, this is one of the best ryes we've ever tasted. Can we buy the whole barrel? So I was like, sure, we could do that. So they picked up the barrel, and it's available in that cocktail bar. They use it in one of their cocktails as well. Louisville is the epicenter of whiskey production in America, with a focus very much on bourbon whiskey. And so us riding into town with a New York rye and half an English accent was a dangerous maneuver. There's a bit of bourbon fatigue down there. They've had a lot of bourbon over the course of the last 100 years or so. A lot of it's coming from the same brands or the same mash bill that they've experienced recently. And so us offering them a historic angle on classic New York rye whiskey was something they hadn't really seen or tasted before. So there was some excitement about that. I'd say that that's been received really, really well. That being said, bourbon is very much the most popular whiskey in America, and we've been developing our bourbon recipes for a while now, and we released our single barrel bourbon, which is made with all New York grain, earlier this year, 2024, and it picked up 95 points in Wine Enthusiast and got the top 100 spirits of 2024 rating.
You're doing something right.
Yeah.
Something's going right,
those
yeah,
are
sure.
blind tastings as well, not like the
not paid for.
the paid for contest.
So something's right, I guess. I think instinctively it's been very useful to have both of us had a grounding in the beverage industry for many years as both bartenders, and then seeing the production side of the business at Widow Jane and understanding the market from that side really gave us an angle of attack that is different and unique and a serious point of differentiation than a lot of other brands out there. A lot of other brands founded by people who have a lot of money from Wall Street, getting bored, looking for something else to do, looking for a hobby or something. That's not why we got into it. And also, we didn't have any money either. So they may have a lot of money, but maybe not a lot of understanding of the business, and maybe not a lot of heart and soul in it. Whereas we've got no money, but we've got a lot of understanding, a lot of heart and soul.
And enthusiasm
for
its success.
Absolutely. Well, and also, there's a cliff there and no safety net. We really strive very hard every day to make it succeed, because if we don't, then we've wasted a decade or so of our lives.
Oh, God.
Just a decade. Don't worry, we could do it all over again.
How much of a devotee of a Manhattan do I need to be able to taste the difference in one made with your product and what they traditionally have been making it from all these years since?
I think, the acid test is, always a side-by-side tasting. One Manhattan with bourbon whiskey, and make one with our New York rye whiskey, and I guarantee you'll taste the difference. And there's not many bartenders worth their salt that will tell you that a bourbon Manhattan is better than a rye Manhattan, for this exact reason. And the reasoning is that bourbon is, by nature, a sweeter whiskey, because it's made predominantly from corn. And so, like cornbread, it's going to read kind of sweet and rich and round, because corn is the base of cornbread too, and we're making whiskey from the same grain, so it's going to have that sweetness running through it too. Rye whiskey is more like rye bread, which is more peppery and angular and savory in style. It still has an underpinning of sweetness, and in fact the rye that we make is really well balanced in that regard. But when you put sweet vermouth on top of an already sweet ingredient, you're getting double sweet, right? Whereas if you put sweet vermouth on top of a savory ingredient, you're getting sweet and savory together. That's balance, and that's structure, and that's why rye, for the most part, tastes better in a cocktail than bourbon. But listen, I'm not here to tell people what to do. Feel free to enjoy a bourbon Manhattan with Fort Hamilton bourbon, if that's what you want. I'm just telling you how I would enjoy my Manhattan, that's all. The problem is in the whiskey business is that the decisions that we made 5 years ago directly affect our sales opportunity today, for the sake of example. So people are like, well, how long do you age your whiskey for? And I'm like, well, we keep it in the barrel as long as we can afford to. Because that's very true, because if you don't sell it ever, well then you're going to go broke. That's just a simple mathematics right there. Yeah. We've managed to build the business with a growth trajectory which accounts for the fact that we didn't have much money to start with. We've built slowly but surely. I mean, there's a reason that we had a full-time job whilst building up our supply chain of whiskey. So the question is today, right, well, how much whiskey do we want to sell in 5 or 6 years' time? And how much do we have to make this year, and how much is that going to cost? And how much revenue are we going to make this year? And do we want to sell more of the company to be able to afford to make more whiskey? And will anyone want to buy that whiskey in 5, 6, 7 years' time. It's a really interesting game. So the gap between production and sales is huge. There's not many businesses on the planet that operate like that. And there's a reason that, 5 main distilleries in America that produce 90+% of all the whiskey consumed in America. It's a very difficult game, and it's very expensive and risky to get into at a national level. So we're selling over 5,000 9-liter cases this year, which is great. We'll do a lot more than that next year, the rate that we're going. But if you wanted to get to 60,000 cases, 100,000 cases, you're going to have to spend tens of millions of dollars in inventory build to get to that point, because you have to buy the grain, you have to run the still, you have to pay for the heat, you have to pay for the barrels, which, don't forget, if you're making bourbon or rye, have to be brand new barrels every time you use them. If you want to make the best of the best, all of it has to be the top quality. Then you have to pay for storage for those barrels for X amount of years as well. And don't forget, next year you have to make more barrels to appear, because you need a supply chain. You can't just make them one year and then forget about it for the next 6. It's a very complicated business model. You have to make a decision about how big you want to get today and how you want to get there.
The tasting room has evolved into something bigger than we had planned for. But because we're a New York agricultural business, everything that we serve in our tasting room has to be from New York State. We don't have a license like any other bar. We opened and we had whiskey tastings, and we realized that not everybody liked whiskey that was in the group, so we added beer and wine. We started making gin, and to make gin you have to have vodka. We used to just sort of have a white label vodka, and people were like, we want to buy your vodka. And so Alex reluctantly turned it over to the designer, and he came back with this Fortress sub-label of Fort Hamilton to not compete with the whiskeys, but still to be a part of. And there was no denying it, so we started selling vodka. And we use it to make all of our drinks. So we also do a tequila, where Alex takes our vodka and he marinates it with seaweed and hot peppers and dried peppers and all sorts of stuff. And we make a spicy margarita. So, and one of our winter menu drinks is a spicy pomegranate margarita. So we have a sort of full service bar, and the New York scene itself has evolved where there's a lot of producers that are making Amaros and sweet vermouths and dry vermouths, so we can make a classic Manhattan made with all New York agricultural ingredients. So that's something very unique about our bar as well.
Besides being a requirement, because of who you are, where you are,
Right.
and what you are, how important is that you're serving these New York products?
It's important for people to understand that you can actually drink from what grows around you. It's been a big part of our sustainability story. I had a firm upstairs, and they do with carbon footprints. I'm just always worried about all the bottles that we throw away. Well, apparently we do really well. But then talking with him about how we reuse our barrels, so we take our bourbon barrels and we have a partnership with a sugar shack upstate. And we tasted a lot of maple syrup, and the Catskill Mountain Sugar House won. And so we shipped them our bourbon barrels, and they put their maple syrup in, and they age for a year. They do the hot fill process into the bottles, and they ship the bottles back down to us, where we put the label on, and we sell them. So that was written up also by Florence Fabricant from the New York Times. That's been a hot selling item for us. It just was also featured on Fox News as a top 10 gifts to buy for the person who's hard to buy for. But again, part of the sustainability, like, well, what do you do with all these barrels? And for a while, they were sort of a hot commodity. People would take them and they would be shipped to Scotland or to France for winemaking, because they can reuse the barrels, whereas American whiskey has to go in a brand new barrel. People are very happy to drink local spirits. They love to support people that they know that are making their spirits as well. It gives them a story to tell. It's a big social topic, and it's great. It's not just about taking a shot. It's about making a cocktail and talking about history and talking about why that cocktail exists and sharing it with your friends and giving them the story to tell as well.
Our location here in Industry City is no accident. So Industry City is a group of buildings in South Brooklyn that were initially called Bush Terminal and were like a one-stop shop for manufacturing and distribution across America. So they would actually bring trains across New York Harbor on barges, on the Cross Harbor Railway Company barges. And then there's train tracks all around here down through, in the middle of the roads, there's train tracks. And they basically would have the trains roll off the barges, roll into these giant courtyards like we're sitting in here, and then they would unload raw materials that they bought from across America, load them up into the buildings, turn them into finished goods. They'd reload now empty trains with the finished goods, float them back across to New Jersey, and they've distributed the products out across America. So there's been manufacturing happening right here in Industry City since the late 1800s. What comes with that is these giant steam generators that are in the courtyards, which heat the buildings during the winter from 9 to 5, Monday to Friday these days, but that would have been more back in the day. But it's enough to make sure that our barrels maintain a higher temperature during the winter than they would otherwise. And that is traditionally how New York whiskeys were aged. So this is a map drawn for King George by a British soldier, technically a Hessian mercenary by the name of Ratzer. There's only one colour copy in existence, and it's in the British Museum. We stole it and we brought it to Brooklyn. It was drawn in 1766, 1767, and it shows Brooklyn and Manhattan back in the day. Manhattan is built up only, not even as far as Canal Street. That blue water source there that says fresh water, that's where 5 Points was, and that was the fresh water source for Lower Manhattan. Interestingly, when 5 Points got polluted, Aaron Burr, the gentleman who shot Alexander Hamilton, our namesake, built a water pipe going from the east side of Manhattan down to that point and sold the water coming out at the end of it, and that company became the Chase Manhattan Bank. What's interesting here is that there's actually a distillery right here. So if you look at this map, you can see that Brooklyn is mainly farmland, and there's really very little habitation at all, except for a few farms. This is where the Gowanus Canal is. Manhattan's mainly farmland too. So when Hamilton said it's quiet uptown, that's what he meant. Like, it's genuinely quiet uptown, it's farm. So interestingly, there's only one industry called out on the map. It is a distillery, the Phil Livingston Distillery, which is in what is now Brooklyn Heights. That's who they named Livingston Street after, the main thoroughfare in downtown Brooklyn. And he was making a little bit of rum from sugar that he traded with the British colonies, and rye whiskey. And that is the style of whiskey that we're trying to recreate. That's one of the earliest ever distilleries in America, right here in Brooklyn. And that style of whiskey that he's making is what we are making too. We also use a mash bill that contains no corn whatsoever for our rye. So it's 90% rye grain, 10% malted barley. All of that comes from the Hudson Valley of New York. Obviously, 200 plus years ago, it would have come from somewhere in Brooklyn, which was all farmland back then, but things have changed since then. Yeah, it's gotten a bit more urban. So the closest place we can get the grain is in the Hudson Valley. So yes, there are, and the third thing that we do that's really significant is we use 30-gallon barrels. So almost all distilleries in America use a 53-gallon barrel, which became industry standard during the Second World War, but was not industry standard until then. Prior to then, the barrel size was whatever the cooper, as the barrel maker down the street, was making. And 53-gallon barrels that weigh 520 pounds when they're full. Very difficult to move without basically heavy equipment, machinery, forklifts, etc. And so, of course, in the 1700s, there was no forklift truck rolling around. So barrels were a little bit smaller to make them more portable. Now, the point is, with a smaller barrel, you get more liquid to surface area ratio. So the aging process is slightly different in a smaller barrel. For that reason, we use 30-gallon barrels instead of 53-gallon barrels for our rye whiskies. That, allied with the heated winter aging and the mash bill that contains no corn, gives us a really authentic approach stylistically to our rye whiskies. And so, yeah, you're right, Bob. I do take it seriously.
In your greatest dreams, where will this all be at that point?
How many years down the road?
5, 10, 20?
5, 10, 20.
Well, we did ask ourselves that when we set the company up, were we setting it up to sell it, or were we setting it up to build a Jack Daniel's store? And the first, I think, was setting it up to sell, only because we had witnessed that from a friend. But the closer that we grow into this business, it's our baby. You want to care for your baby as long as you can.
I think we've set this brand up to be a national brand at the very least, if not international. And the story of the Revolutionary War and the Battle of Brooklyn transcends our little backwater of New York City, and it transcends Manhattan, and it transcends New York State.
I think it transcends that little ocean between us.
Potentially,
and your homeland.
potentially. I can't wait to go and sell it in England. That's going to be an amazing moment, you know. The idea was always to set it up as something larger than just a mom and pop distillery in Brooklyn. But the fact of the matter is, if you do want to go national, like I was explaining earlier about how the reality of the numbers there, is that you kind of got to get in bed with a bigger player at some point. So you do want help with distribution, you do want help with production, you do want help with sales at some point. But we're not there quite yet. We see very strong growth coming at us in 2025.
It's great to be in New York, though. This is where every brand comes to try to break ground. It's like that song. If you can make it in New York, you can make it anywhere.
It's like country music in Texas.
Yes, but this just happens to be our backyard. And so we have a lot of opportunities. And the name Fort Hamilton means so much, and the Brooklyn part of that story, because New York is a place where people come through and they evolve and they succeed, and then they move out to New Jersey, or they move bigger and further away. Someone called the other day, they happened to get the wrong size shirt, but that was such a blessing because it led to a phone call, and he couldn't believe, that it was me on the other end. And then he told me the story of why he bought the Fort Hamilton, because his dad had been in World War II, and his mother lived in Brooklyn, and he had been on the Fort Hamilton Army base, met his mother, they were married, and now he lives in New Jersey. So the story becomes a bigger part of people's lives. And he happens to be a whiskey fan, which also helps.
What does this mean to you?
It's fabulous to have moved to America and managed to build something here that I feel is important, that has added something to the conversation that was lost, and brought something back to life that tastes really good, and that people seem to really respond to and enjoy. That's really important, especially coming from abroad and making a life in America and starting a family and being able to be entrepreneurial and express yourself creatively at the same time is a really rare thing. So I'm really blessed in that regard. And to do it all with my beautiful wife is just phenomenal,
All of that together we collectively refer to as the American dream. Have you achieved it?
Not yet. Working on it.
Achieving.
Work in progress.
And do want to let you know, if you are looking for a unique gift, Fort Hamilton does have a website. You can buy their spirits, or better yet, you can buy that maple syrup, which is to die for. Thanks again for joining us for this week for On the Road with Kelly and Bob. Don't forget, you can listen anywhere you get your podcast, or better yet, download the free Odyssey app. Listen anytime, anywhere.